is the great show for the people.
All right, can I ask you guys a serious question?
Absolutely.
Gun to your head, one fight camp, life on the line, it's all there. Who are you picking to head up your camp? I'm going to give you three choices. You ready? 1, Steven Seagal. 2, Edmund Tarverdyan of Ronda fame, Edmund Tarverdyan. 3, Doc Lewis of Punch-Out fame, ran Little Mac's historic run all the way to the top. Who you picking?
No question, Doc.
Doc
you gotta
Lewis?
take Doc. Not only did he coach one of the most underdog fighters of all time to glory and fame over Mike Tyson, but he also looks like Stanley from The Office.
Okay,
so
well,
that's the guy I want to look at all day long in the gym.
my concern with Doc would be that he'd be like washed. Like he hasn't been around. He's been in the game for like 20 years. You bring him in, he's still doing the old shit.
No, those are the best trainers.
You think so?
You do not need to evolve. You just need to just stick in your lane, do what you're good at, and stay with that. You don't need head move. I don't want my trainer shouting head movement. Yeah, I don't want that. So Doc all day.
All right.
What athletic commission signed off on having Little Mac fight heavyweights? That is just, I mean, that is preposterous.
These were the old days of combat.
Man,
Jake.
It was the Wild
Maybe
West
that's
back then.
Maybe that's the real reason they changed it to Magic Man when they made the second one. Like they didn't lose the rights to Tyson. And like an athletic commission was like, guys, he can't fight Tyson. We make up Magic Man here.
Perfect.
Jake?
Well, there's a clear answer. And a little peek behind the curtain, for the listeners out there. My role isn't really research heavy. However, I turned the tables this week and I did a ton. We're talking hours of research. Let me tell you a little bit about that research. So it started off with a little documentary film called Above the Law. And then moved into Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, Out for Justice, Under Siege, which is a classic, on Deadly Ground, and then finished up with Under Siege 2, which is clearly the pinnacle of modern film, really. But definitely Steven Seagal's career. How do you not go Steven Seagal?
Can I just mention that you have our favorite website in the world, Wikipedia, $3, opened up right now, and I see a lot of direct-to-video after what you're talking about. I noticed the ones you left out are direct. You want to talk about that?
In a way, yes. Let me answer your question in a roundabout way, just by naming some of the roles that Steven Seagal has embodied. Of course, we know Casey Ryback, the greatest cook, assassin of all time. We also have, him playing himself, a character called Frank Glass and Jonathan Cold. Those are pretty sweet. And then we move into some gems like Cock Puncher from 2008's The Onion.
Excuse me?
Whoa! Hold your tongue, sir.
So, hey, man, I'm just reading. I'm just reading here.
It's Wikipedia. It can't be wrong.
Yeah, it can't be wrong. The biggest takeaway here is absolutely, of course, Steven Seagal, front snap kick. However, more importantly, 2019, the year that Steven Seagal makes triumphant return in Under Siege 3. Boom.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Breaking the news here first.
Hang on
okay?
1 minute. I asked you to do just a little bit of extra research for this episode.
Yeah.
And that's what you give me.
I did a ton of research,
All
man.
right.
To be fair, Under Siege 3 is big news.
Okay.
That is big
all right.
research.
Under Siege 2, they're on the train? That was phenomenal.
Okay, well, this is MMA Untold. The man you just heard from was Jake Copeland, watching all the Steven Seagal movies
And
in
this train
preparation
is off the
for
tracks.
this.
Yeah,
It
this
is
train.
way off the tracks. That is the Godfather, Tim Thomas, and I am Taylor Gabriel. So today we are covering part 2 of our 3-part series on Anderson Silva. And in part 1, we covered the rise of the Spider, and today we'll be discussing the reign of Anderson Silva. So let's get it back on track here, boys. What do we got today?
This is the crazy run, man. This is one of those things. I'm really excited to do this episode because from afar, we briefly touched on this, part 1, but from afar, it just looks like he's just running through everybody. If you load up his fight record, it just, KO, finish, everything's great. But behind the scenes, there's a lot going on here. With a little bit deeper review, things weren't always great with the UFC, with Anderson. You know, it was a weird run.
Yeah, so when we ended our last episode, Silva had just arrived in the UFC and quickly dispatched Chris Lieben and secured a title shot at middleweight where he promptly rearranged Rich Franklin's face. And I'm sorry, I did not mean that in any disrespectful way.
Fully changed his name to Rick Franklin.
Well,
So,
good.
Yeah,
Yes.
love to protect the innocent.
Yeah. It was not fun.
All right, so now Silva is the man to beat at middleweight, and it would take nearly 7 years for someone to come along and do just that.
Yeah, man. Just like I said before, this run was amazing. This kind of like you said, Jake, kind of was a lot of your fandom was during this time, and he was kind of the thing that was always there. He's kind of like a new fan's like Mighty Mouse. You know, Mighty Mouse has just been around forever. Anderson was kind of that before. It's just there was all this change in the UFC, but there was always Anderson knocking people out.
And do you remember towards the end of this run, people were starting, and I guess this happens with any great athlete, but people start to they want to see him fight, but they start to want a change in guard. They start to want some new blood. They get tired of seeing the same old thing. And as exciting as Silva was, his run went so long that people were calling for him to vacate the belt, leave the division, somebody to come along and beat him, anything for a change.
Try to put that in perspective. 6.5 years of dominance. Like, that is legit insane.
It's like the Bulls dynasty in a sense, right? I mean, they win 6 out of 8, and that's like this epic dynasty. He essentially was a one-man dynasty.
And for a stretch of that, he's fighting 3 times a year.
Yep.
I mean, this isn't a guy who's fighting once a year for 7 years.
Against top competition, too. These guys were killers that he was beating. And again, reference Wikipedia, his win streak is the entire screen.
There's all green over there right now.
They're all wins on my little breakdown. It's remarkable. Like, this is a remarkable achievement.
To your statement, Taylor, though, I'll say this. I'm one of the people that gets stir crazy. Like, I turn on people like GSP for like no reason. It just gets stupid, right? You look back on it, you're like, why the hell did I ever turn on GSP? Anderson, as we'll go through here, it's the reason we are going to talk about a lot of these fights is there's a lot of weird shit with these fights, and some of it is on Anderson. So I'm not saying it was justified what people did when they turned on him, but I kind of get it. I mean, I was one of the haters, so...
Well, I mean, we said it in part 1 that this is kind of a theme in Anderson's entire story. Things are never simple and straightforward when it comes to the Spider. And we see it right away in his first title defense. So he wins those first 2 fights in the UFC. And then right away after winning the title, he's going to face off against Ultimate Fighter Season 4 winner Travis Lutter, or as some refer to him, the Michael Jordan of Jiu-Jitsu.
Michael Jordan-esque in his grappling skills is Travis Lutter. No, it's not. He's not that good? He's not that good. Okay.
God, I miss Goldie so much. Can we get Goldie back? I know we lost Jimmy Smith, but if we get Goldie back, it'd be so good. Can't say that. Michael Jordan?
My biggest problem with Goldie, I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times, is he doesn't know when to pluralize things. So if your subject is pluralized, then the ending word should not be. So like 1 minute remains is correct. 1 minutes remain is well, what is that? You can't pluralize one. Sir, every time, pick a fight. Pick literally any fight. And there's a 90% chance he completely blew that.
This is going to be a new segment.
That is literally my only issue with him. Yeah, he said some dumb shit. That's fine. I've said some dumb shit. I have about 5 hours on tape with you guys. I'm sure there's plenty of pull quotes to use. I have no problems with him except for he does not understand that minutes remain and minute remains. He just doesn't get it.
Yes.
He cannot pluralize the Lone Rangers.
Okay, should we go through some of the weird shit with this fight?
Yeah, tell kind of what happened.
I kind of actually, just a personal note. So this is, one of the pay-per-views we got back in the day. Jake, I don't know if you remember when we got this, But it was our first sour taste of MMA because we're kind of getting our feet wet, really learning it again. And you get to fight night and it's like, oh, the title fight's off. The guy didn't make weight. And I'm like, what? And they're like, they're fighting, but it's not for the belt. And you're like, well, what the fuck am I ordering? Because, again, we're broke ass in college. We're like, what the hell? So again, this is that first taste of what was unfortunately a recurring problem in MMA is events changing at the last second. But, the fight goes on. Luter didn't make weight. He looked like absolute dog shit on the scales. But man, he actually gave Anderson a fucking fight. He ends up on top of him, raining down punches. And does he try to grab an arm? At that part, I can't remember. I think he tries to get the arm and can't.
Yeah, he's in full mount, I believe. Yeah, he's trying to either ground and pound finish him or submit him. And this is what's so important about doing part one, because you see that shoot box Anderson Silva that has a lot of movement, has incredible striking, Muay Thai and Taekwondo, but he really doesn't have the grappling or jiu-jitsu. He gets taken down very easily, and he's not able to reverse position or get back up or turn things into submissions off his back until he ends up with Big Nog and the Nogueira brothers. And then now here he is in the UFC, and he's had no threat of a takedown from Lieben or Franklin at this point. But now Luter gets him down, and as much as Goldberg got it wrong with the Michael Jordan comparison, Luter is a really good jiu-jitsu practitioner. So he's in a dominant position on Anderson Silva, a little bit heavier than Anderson, and then Anderson ends up getting him in a triangle and finishing him with elbows to the top of the head.
Now, one of the first episodes we did with you, Jake, you said one of the things you didn't like about Anderson was he was almost like a video game character with everything on 100, right? And we kind of talked about it. We went back and forth, and you agreed later that, yeah, that's more of a John Jones GSP thing, that unbeatable fighter, and you said that's no fun. This is the start of a thing that's going to come back over and over again in these fights where there are some problems with Anderson's game. I know you said he's solved them, and he has. But the fact that Travis Luter, who is very mediocre, is able to put him in trouble here when he is in his prime, we are in prime Anderson Silva, is what made Anderson interesting and why people should have caught on a little earlier and gotten on this train, because the funnest stuff for me to watch, why do we all hate on the NBA right now, right? Like, for a while, the Warriors, nobody can beat them. That's no fun. Anderson's vulnerable, okay? And any night he can lose. And when he is the big bad, when that guy can lose anytime you pay to see it, that's what makes it fun, right? That's when you pay for the Floyd pay-per-views, when it's somebody that can actually beat him. When he's fighting these cans, just like, this guy, he can't be touched. Anderson could be beat. It just, obviously, it doesn't happen for quite a while.
Yeah, I don't want to oversell this fact, but you're right about that. You're right. Even within the fight, you never know what you're going to get. You're going to get a move you've never seen before. You're going to get a flash knockout. You're going to get Anderson Silva in trouble for 5 straight rounds, as we'll see later on in his story. Or you might get somebody in full mount in the most dominant, or one of the most dominant positions you can possibly be in MMA. And then 30 seconds later, he's tapping to Anderson. It's absolutely insane. And it's what, as an Anderson Silva fan, it's what made it fun. Like you were saying, it was a constant roller coaster.
Yep.
And roller coasters are a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, this is true Silva fashion. So he beats Luter at his own game and continues forward. And next, he steamrolls the 25-6 former Pancrase middleweight champion Nate Marquardt by TKO in the first round. And this sets up a rematch with Rich, not Rick, Franklin, who had won 2 fights of his own in the interim. So this is their second meeting, and this really feels like a bad case of deja vu.
I feel so bad for Franklin heading into something like this, which somebody just, like you said, rearranges your face and you've got to go back in and do it again, and it doesn't go much better.
Yeah, I don't have much to say. Watch the fight. There's not much to say other than you just feel bad. Whether you like or dislike Rich Franklin, you feel bad he got dismantled again.
Well, I like to, this is probably an extreme comparison, but I think about people who are avid surfers and they get attacked by a shark. The last thing I would ever do is go back in the water. I just wouldn't. Right. Sorry. If a thing almost literally consumed me, I wouldn't go back. And then they're right back in the water. We'll see it later in part 3 of Anderson's story where something tragic happens to him and he's right back in the cage. This is one of those cases where you fight a guy who completely embarrasses you, rearranges your face, and then you go right back. And then the scary part is he gets you in the same tie plume. He grabs you by the back of the head. And what is going through your mind at that point?
That's that record scratch moment. Yep, that's me.
That's where you tap out to the tie plume. You're like, nope, I know what's coming. I'm out.
Yeah. Well, that's a testament to Rich Franklin. And it almost reminds me of our constant conversations off mic about Cormier and Jones and the fact that Cormier can ride off into the sunset, but that competitor spirit, it's like he's going to be drawn to fight Jones a third time while he has the leverage to do so because he just wants to prove he's the best. And Franklin, bless his heart, man, he was a competitor. He wanted to try again and step back into that nightmare.
Yeah, what did we say? He had one loss the first time he stepped into the cage with Silva. He loses, he goes and wins 2 more. I mean, at this point, Silva's pretty much the only person to ever beat him.
Yeah, you can't blame him.
So why not try
Maybe
again?
Maybe underestimated him the first time.
Sure.
Maybe they had a big midterm or final to give the next day. Who knows? Sorry.
Perfect.
All right. So Silva was quickly establishing himself as the best heavyweight in the world, and whispers of pound for pound best were starting to surface. But many questioned Silva's glaring weakness, wrestling. And as it happened, the former Pride welterweight and middleweight champion Dan Henderson was now in the UFC and was looking to unify the belts.
These are those original super fights, you know, as these are going down. This was super exciting as we're getting into the sport because you always heard, you know, the OG fans are always saying the Pride guys were the best, and having somebody come back over like this and unify the belts, especially like Hendo, who seemed like he was built to beat Anderson potentially. This was exciting as fuck. And look, Hendo came out of the gate strong. I mean, he wins round 1.
He absolutely does. And again, makes Silva look very vulnerable. I believe we watched this at the Foundry together. Jake, you were there?
Oh,
I believe so, yeah. I wouldn't miss the Hendo fight.
So the Foundries is, can I give a quick Foundry untold?
I hope you will.
So we have this bar in our area, and it's like it's almost like an old industrial, I guess that's the Foundry, the name of the Foundry.
It's almost like an old theater, really.
It's like a theater. Didn't they take away all the screens and they just put like 1 trillion TVs up? It was amazing. So like, it's just MMA everywhere you fucking look. And it was gorgeous because they had so many TVs on this massive wall where the theater screens would have been, that even for the people that didn't want to watch the fights, they had the random sports on the little TVs and the pool tables.
Yeah, it was great because you could literally do anything and still watch the fight. You didn't have to be glued to 1 or 2 screens. Like anywhere you look, there's screens everywhere.
Yeah, so if you can imagine your local theater, let's say they have 10 gigantic projection screens. So they took out essentially all the walls separating the theaters. So you have this one massive wall, and then they cut those theater projection screens essentially into 4 or 8. And so you just have this massive wall of hundreds of screens, and not small television screens. These are gigantic screens. So yeah, everywhere you look, you're seeing the fight. It doesn't matter where you are in this place.
This is why we have to let the author tell the story, because you just painted the picture that the whole time I was trying to tell, I was actually like, we're taking Jaeger bombs, we're taking drone, and there's pool tables, and there's fights, and then the author steps in. It's like, that's what I wanted to say.
And in my head, I'm just like, hey, we can hit the Foundry right after this, so
no one can stop us.
Yeah, so that was good times, and that really, like you said, you had gotten introduced to Anderson around the first Rich Franklin fight. And although I kind of was watching from afar, I really didn't become an Anderson fan until I think the Nate Marquardt fight and then the second Rich Franklin fight.
Let's do that. I don't know if we ever told that on mic. That was one of the ways, you were coming out. We were at different universities at the time, and you came out that night. It was a Saturday night. Obviously, it was a Saturday. Captain Obvious Strikes. It was a Saturday night for the pay-per-view. Thanks, Tim. And I was literally like, hey, man, you got to see this guy. I just got introduced to him. I think it was the Nate fight. And he did not disappoint. And right away, you're like, I love this guy.
Yeah, I think my first fight that I watched at college was the Matt Hughes Hoist Gracie.
We talked about that
because I was at a party or someone's house, and they were getting it because, again, you and I had watched the very early days of UFC. So I said, okay, I know who Hoist Gracie is, and I know who Matt Hughes is because we had a mutual friend.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jake. We had a mutual friend that was a big Matt Hughes fan, because isn't Hughes from the Midwest, right?
Yeah.
So we had a friend that liked him. So I knew who both fighters were. So I watched that fight. But I really wasn't back in. I wasn't sold after watching that fight. It wasn't until being introduced to Anderson Silva that I was sold back.
Can we have
UFC.
a call out live on the air? Do you remember this was your phase where you were like saying like the fucking ninjas from your little show should fight them? Do you remember this? You were a little skeptical at first.
Yes, I was.
They could just do their little death blow thing and the guy would die. I'm like, Taylor, what's going on?
No, we shouldn't talk about that.
We were young.
Got really heavy into an anime phase.
All right. So at this point, Henderson does fall to Silva. Silva beats him in the second round by submission, right? Rear naked choke.
Yeah. And look, pay attention here because another little part of the blueprint has just been written, right? Because Luder again shows he can be taken down. Hendo shows again with pressure, you can get him down, get a hold of him, take him to the ground, steals a round from him. He's winning these fights, no question. It's not like John Jones where it's like, oh my God, his arm literally almost snapped in half. Like these things, he's definitely winning these fights. Is he losing around here? Yes. But if there's a team smart enough in the background paying attention, we're slowly writing a blueprint to beat him. Okay? But go ahead.
And then on the flip side of that, there's a common theme with the greats, and that is when they do face adversity, they do not panic. Silva's getting his head hammer-fisted, his temples hammer-fisted by Henderson, and he looks like he couldn't be calmer. It's like the old Fedor thing where he looks like he's just half asleep, and almost like when you're watching it, if you do go back and watch this fight, he almost looks annoyed. So, like his little brother is pestering him and he can't do anything about it at the moment, but he knows the round is going to end. They're going to stand him back up and then he's going to get to take out his aggression on Henderson at that point. And it's just insane because that is really the big difference. Skill is one thing, but your ability to handle the storm, to stay calm in the storm is something that really is only attributed to the great fighters.
And I'm not going to keep bringing up John Jones, but that's why John Jones is so scary because there's no pattern, there's no logic. It changes all the time with him. He's different. He evolves nonstop, even when he's not even that active right now. So it's so scary because as an Anderson hater, when you're watching this, you're going like, okay, this is what they have to do. They got to do this. And you would wait for a wrestler to come up and be like, hey, Anderson's in a little bit of trouble here. Maybe. But the people like John Jones, that's so scary because at least here, it's going to be slow, and you're right. He's smart enough that he can get around it, for sure, and he's clearly the better fighter. It's not even close, but they're finding a way to beat him slowly.
Yeah, so Silva had once again silenced his critics and overcome his greatest weakness. And in the process, many, including Silva, believed he had cleaned out his division. So rather than wait for a new challenger to emerge, Silva wanted to test himself. First, by asking to fight one of his heroes, Roy Jones Jr. But when Dana poo-pooed that idea...
Nice use of poo-poo.
Yeah, thank you. When Dana poo-pooed that idea, he posed another one in its place. Dana said of Silva, quote, "This guy sat down in a meeting with us literally 2 months ago and said, 'You're not fighting me enough. I want to fight more.' So Dana asked Silva if instead of fighting Roy Jones, he wanted to move up and take a fight at light heavyweight. Silva agreed, but made it clear he wouldn't stay at light heavyweight while his friend and training partner, Lyoto Machida, was champion.
Well, this is back before this stuff was all tired. You know, this moving up and down right now is a little gimmicky and shitty. This is when it was amazing. This is when you only had people like BJ Penn doing it and beating like Matt Hughes, and it was something special. So seeing him go up, especially 20 pounds, was amazing. And, man, the Urban fight was just embarrassing. I mean, that was an ass whipping. It almost felt like, I think it was on free TV, but it almost felt like a ripoff because you're like, well, that took 2 seconds. But I think it was a fight night, actually, if I remember correctly.
I believe it was,
But
yeah.
holy shit.
Yeah, he just caught one of Irvin's kick, threw a straight punch. Irvin falls to the ground, and then a few punches later, it's over.
And that's a minute into the first round.
Yeah.
And that's cool every once in a while. We've said many times in this podcast, if you throw that in, if there's not massive breaks between fights and it's a quick thing on free TV, that's cool, man. It's like getting to see your favorite guy go out there and do his thing and show your buddies, right? You know he's going to beat his ass probably. I know anything can happen, but it's okay to do that.
And I don't want to get too far ahead here, but as an Anderson Silva fan, it was great to see him go up. It was great to see a finish that quick. But it also was one of those things that eats at you because you wanted him to go up. Again, this was before all of the Conor McGregor stuff, Amanda Nunes, before everybody going up in weight and jumping weight classes. I wanted to see him challenge for the belt. And It just so happens that his friend, this is very DC Kane, it just so happens that his friend is the champion at the time. And so he doesn't get to challenge for the light heavyweight belt. And it's kind of a shame because this is pre-John Jones. So I feel like Silva had an opportunity to be a two-weight champion. And he missed his opportunity because he wouldn't fight his friend.
What if he had fought Rashad Taylor before
don't
his
make
friend?
me pick.
It's going to end in the podcast.
Well, it's funny because I would say that version of Rashad Evans probably would have been able to beat him by taking him down. But then again, if Dan Henderson can't, if Nate Marquardt can't, if some of these other guys who are really good grapplers and wrestlers can't, who's to say?
Well, you know why? I love we're doing predictions on the fight that didn't happen. But I think you're right. I think Anderson would have won because this is the Rashad that was in love with his striking, who had just knocked out Liddell and stuff.
That is very true.
And so he was trying to knock everybody out.
Well, and Machida had just...
Yeah, that's what I was saying before. If this was before we lost to Machida, but...
So, I mean, you got to figure if Machida did that to him, Anderson
probably
would have done the same. So, I mean, we've got our feelings about training partners not wanting to fight each other. I've gone back and forth on it. I think it's okay. That was Lyoto's weight class, not Silva's, but it was nice to see him go up and challenge himself, like you said, when not a lot of fighters were.
I'm a huge dickhead about this stuff. Like, I always think they should fight each other. And then I watched the Water Anderson documentary and I see him and Machida going back and forth when they're training and they're like really good friends. I'm like, God, I am a jackass. It's like perfect. It's so not fair to go in there and fight for your livelihood.
No, you should move up in weight class and fight your best friend.
Yeah, it's so not fair. Yeah,
that's ridiculous.
I'm an ass.
And how do you feel about the Roy Jones Jr. talk? Because again, this is pre-Conor Mayweather.
Dana said some ridiculous shit in this period where he's like, he's the best at any combat sport. He's the best boxer. And I know that's like promoter, like hype and hyperbole, whatever, but it's like, hey, calm the fuck down.
Roy Jones was old, but he wasn't that old at this point.
Wasn't Roy the man? During this is when he's moving all over the place, different weight classes, beating everybody.
It's cool, though, to see, again, I mean, people give Conor a lot of flack, and obviously the Mayweather fight was a money grab. But one thing Conor never shies away from is challenging himself. And there are a lot of MMA fighters that won't take fights unless they're safe or unless they have time to put on weight properly or unless they have time to train properly. Silva, will volunteer to take a fight on 2 days' notice. He'll go to another sport if allowed. He'll move up a weight class. He'll move down a weight class. This is a guy who just enjoys a challenge.
Bear with me, fans. This is going to piss a lot of people off, but one of the things I've come to realize as we've continued to do this research is there's a lot more similarities between Anderson and Conor than I ever thought. You got, if you take the shit talking aside, because that's totally different. But in the cage, they're both counter strikers. They both fight the same way with that. And they're the willingness to take a fight on 2 days' notice, any opponent, save a card, it is kind of similar. Whatever it takes.
Though many considered his fight with Irvin hardly a test, Silva would move back down to defend his middleweight title against the next guy in line. And although Patrick Cote was a heavy-hitting veteran, most felt this challenge was no more difficult than Irvin. And when the fight ended in less than spectacular fashion, Silva's critics let him have it.
This was a weird one. First off, Jake, this is your boy, the Predator. I don't know if you remember him when he was
I do.
But no, so this is when, look, they're in full-on promoter mode. They're giving him a veteran who's a heavy striker who's going to stand with him, which is good. This is good, right? I mean, if there's nobody else, let's fucking have a slugfest. This guy's got a chin. He can throw. He's got a heavy right hand. Let's do it. And this is a super, super important fight here I'm sure we're going to lighten this up, but I actually want to talk about how crazy serious this one is. Was it Jack Slack that wrote the article about the importance of this one? I don't know if it was, I think it was him.
I think so.
But this is the first time from what I remember that he's in there with a striker, and Cote, even against his own corner's advice, realizes that Anderson's purely a counter striker. And I'm going to keep painting this picture here because in the second round or whatever, he's like, fuck it, I'm not leading anymore. And his corner is basically like, what the fuck are you doing? You're the predator. Get your ass out there. Let's go. And it was almost like he figured it out in the cage, and Anderson was lost. And I want to say a judge gave Cote a round before the fluke incident. But again, all you remember after that night is this fluke ending that we're going to talk about. But again, something important has happened. Cote has shown if you don't lead him, he's a good fighter, but he's like maybe the best counter striker ever. Cote is like, fine, I'm not playing your game. And you make comments like this all the time, Taylor, where you're like, I don't know why people do this or that. No one had realized. Anderson's waiting you out. You talk about the first minute and a half all the time. We'd get together and watch the fights and people would start throwing a fit because Anderson would be reading somebody like a computer. And you're like, he's just taking in all the information. They're going to come at him. He's going to see them fuck up and boom, they're toast. And it happened every time. Cote saw it happening and was like, fine, fuck it. I'm not throwing another punch. So again, we continue to write this blueprint here where he confused Anderson and then his fucking knee got all jacked up.
Yeah, he just takes a step backwards and falls to the canvas. It's pretty bad. I was live for that event, and that was my first live UFC event.
Yeah, that was an interesting one.
I was so excited to see Anderson headline an event in Chicago in my backyard, and then what a lackluster ending.
Well, and you know why I wasn't there? Because it was a little Halloween party that evening. I don't even know if were you there, Jake? That was the Baghead night?
Yeah, you have to be a little bit more specific than Halloween.
That's where I was Baghead. There were 2 Marty McFlys at the party, which is always super
Yeah.
awkward. Two killer Marty McFlys. That's always awkward when you show up to the
I was there. I remember being there. I can't tell you what happened that day.
Do you remember who you were by chance? I don't remember who you were dressed as.
No.
I don't. I was Baghead, so I couldn't see shit, but
I have a habit.
Strangers fan.
I have a habit of losing a little bit of control when I drink, especially, if we're talking, 2010.
Couple
yeah,
drinks.
I couldn't tell you one thing that happened that year, so definitely not that night.
But I'll say this, to bring it back, we made a point. It was a huge Halloween party, wasn't in our house. We got the UFC. Anderson was appointment television even then, and people were into it until the fluke ending. So it's just that UFC curse where you get people to buy in, and then it's just like, oh yeah, what's going on? Fight's over. Guy jacked up his knee. Well, fuck this. Back to drinking. Like,
by the way, you want to chip in $5?
Yeah. There's just that shitty mug with like 1 5 in it that you put in.
Sounds right.
No, but it was a wild one.
So Silva would do himself no favors in his next fight against Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist Thales Leites. The fight would go the distance, marking the first time since joining the UFC Silva had gone to a decision. And during the fight, the fans at the sold-out Bell Center booed incessantly. Afterwards, Dana White remarked it was, quote, an embarrassment, calling Silva a shell of his former self. And he added, quote, I'm going to push him. I'm going to put him in fights with guys who aren't afraid of him, the guys who are going to come after him. And Dana, surprisingly, stayed true to his word, matching Silva up with former light heavyweight champion Forrest Griffin. And what resulted was possibly the most beautiful and horrifying display of martial arts skills ever seen in the octagon.
Can we get a sound drop of It Hurts just on repeat for the next 25 minutes?
That one was tough. We got some Forrest apologists here, and this is hard to talk about. You're probably going to have to take it back because we can't do this.
I don't even want to talk about it.
It was so depressing.
Yeah, that was
well,
terrible.
let's build up to this. So, as you said, the Cote fight was an unfortunate ending, and then he fights Thales Leites, who's a great Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy, but he would not engage Silva. So, as you said, that blueprint was kind of in place, and Leites literally would not strike. He would just fall to his back and ask for Silva to jump into his guard. When Silva wouldn't oblige, they would stand him back up, and then 30 seconds later, rinse and repeat. So it was a really, really bad look for Silva. It was a really bad look for Leites, but no one faulted him for it. It was like all the blame was on Anderson because he needed to do what he always does. He needed to somehow make some magic happen. And when he didn't, there was a lot of flack from fans, from the media, and from Dana White himself. So then Silva moves back up to light heavyweight. Forrest had just lost the title. So recently a champion at light heavyweight. So this is a real test for Anderson in the eyes of most fans. This is a real test. I think you and I even talked before the fight happened, and I was concerned.
Oh, Forrest was huge.
It's a little Forrest untold. So he beat Shogun, which was awesome. That was amazing. And I really like Shogun too, but for him, because everyone, I think going into it, the thought was that, Forrest is going to get outclassed. Like, yeah, Forrest is in over his head. Like, this little Forrest ride has been fun where it lasted. There's been a couple losses sprinkled in there, but yeah, we're crossing the line. And then he beats Shogun. And then, Rampage comes over.
Dude, I'm sorry, Kutchik, you keep doing everything, but that Shogun fight, I mean, seriously, we talked about it briefly in the Pride episode. Shogun was the fucking man.
Yeah.
He was like the original John, that was the John Jones hype train of like, if this guy ever comes to America, everyone's fucked. Like, everyone thought he was going to be that original world beater, and Forrest beats him.
Yeah, so that was awesome. And then he takes on Rampage, who was kind of the same thing, like this scary Pride dude, like, who comes over, wins the light heavyweight champion. Yeah. I'm a whoop Chuck's ass. So, yeah, I mean, so he beats Rampage, and then he loses Rashad. I don't want you guys to talk about Rashad ever again, so I'm not even going to mention Rashad. So after that, as a Forrest fan, you're like, all right, well, he just had these amazing fights. He lost Rashad. If he can take out Silva, like, man, this guy is legit as it gets, because Forrest is kind of well-rounded, never really super excelled in one area, and he was always kind of the underdog, but he's super likable, and like, man, if he could take out Silva, this would be amazing.
And it did not happen.
Well, do you want to say what did happen?
Oh my God. Well, I want to make a quick, it was a bloodbath. It was a minute or two, not even. It was terrible. It wasn't just an ass whipping. I mean, I
don't think Forrest landed a single punch. It was very a la Chris Lieben, but more embarrassing.
It was brutal. I do want to note, for the fans out there, this is an interesting note that did surface, and it's kind of interesting. Again, we like to kind of go over the untold stuff sometimes. The word was, for whatever it's worth, and look, let's be clear. Anderson was going to beat Forrest's ass no matter what. It would look like he was in the Matrix. But the word was that the week leading up to the fight, Forrest had been knocked out in camp. And that's why his lights were punched out so easily, is because he's fresh off a true, KO in practice. And now he gets hit flush again and went down, because his chin up until this point had been pretty good. And people were like, what the fuck? Anderson's got the power of the gods in that hand. It's like, well, to be fair, something happened in camp. I just want to bring that up. It's worth noting.
No, it is worth noting. One thing you said in there was the Matrix. This was where Anderson kind of started his legacy, or his whatever you want to call it, got extremely big at this point. He was bigger than life with those moves, with the dodging of Forrest punches, backpedaling, and throwing a little bitty jab and knocking Forrest to the canvas with it. This is where the mythos of Anderson Silva gets out of control. And congratulations to Forrest on being a secure individual and being able to laugh about it afterwards. So he was on a radio show, and this is what he had to say after the fight.
He punched you in the chin repeatedly. Yeah. And I was very confused. And I tried to punch him. And he literally moved his head out of the way and looked at me like I was stupid for doing it. He looked at me like, why would you do such a stupid thing? He looked at me like, oh, did you really think you were going to hit me? What a stupid thing to think, you slow white boy. And then he punched me. And I felt embarrassed for even trying to punch him.
Oh my God.
I felt like some kid trying to wrestle with his dad.
God, I miss Forrest so much.
He was the best, man. There's no one else like him. He's
like
incredible.
Kid trying to wrestle your dad? That's perfect.
Silva, I mean, the way I think of it, you guys mentioned the Matrix or whatever, and Silva really implements, like you said, Taylor, those heavy leans and stuff, and he makes fighters look like they're fighting underwater. Like they're all just a hair or too slow, to the point where like in that clip, like Silva has time to react, dodge, look at you like you're an idiot for even considering throwing that punch, and then punch you back before you know what happened.
It's some of my favorite stuff with this sport. It's like recently with the Ortega Holloway, where you could tell that, a few rounds in, Holloway has completely figured him out. And there's the video of him actually raising Ortega's hands and telling him to basically cover his face. And he's just completely figured out what Ortega's doing. It's awesome when someone like Anderson has solved the riddle. And even a minute or two in, he's just like, oh, this is over. And he's just annoyed, if anything, and it's a massacre.
So Silva had restored faith and order and moved back down to his home at middleweight to defend the belt once again, this time against fellow Brazilian Damian Maia. But as quickly as he had gained his goodwill back, he burned all of it and more in his fight with Maia, dancing and showboating so much that after the fight, Dana White went so far as to threaten to cut Silva from the UFC.
Okay, a few things. One, I want to say up until this point, Dana, at 1 minute he's calling Anderson the best fighter in the world. The next minute he's shitting on him at this point. But what he's doing in the background is truly he's put on a promoting masterclass, because as soon as he had that boring fight, he's putting him in here with strikers. People are going to come after him. This fight, from what I remember, was supposed to be Vitor Belfort. I think something happened with Vitor. He got ill. He got injured. They delayed that fight. He was putting him in there with people that would stand with him, people like Forrest that would come after him. Dana was doing his part. They caught a bad break here, and they had to have a main event for their pay-per-view, and so we bring in Damian Maia. That being said, the perception of this fight, I'm going to go back to my narrative of this blueprint. But the perception of that fight is that Silva was clowning around. But if you take a deeper look, once again, Maia refused to engage, and Anderson refused back, and he starts clowning around, starts making those Playboy comments, which I don't know if you read the article with Maia's rebuttal to that, but this is where Silva kind of starts to come off like a bit of a D-bag, to be honest, because Maia isn't a Playboy. He didn't grow up with money. And Silva's always got that narrative, which we're going to get to later, where he's trying to play the poor card. I'm trying not to be rude, but he always does, and he did grow up in poverty, and obviously we have a lot of respect for that, but so did Maia.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Playboy is a very insulting term in Brazil. I'm trying to think of what
comparison.
Yeah, what a comparison would be, but basically it's somebody with a lot of money that's a little bit douchey because they have a lot of money. And I don't really know any other way to put it.
Yeah, and Maia seems to say that he thinks that just because he went to college, Anderson seems to think he was made of money. But he tells the story of how his mom didn't even have an apartment until he was older and an adult. So he didn't have any money either. So this is a weird fight for Anderson. It's almost like, hell, for him, it's almost better to say he was clowning around, because what might have really happened is Maia refuses to engage. Anderson's talking all this shit, trying to get him to engage, clowning around, saying rude shit to him. Maia won't change. And it's like Anderson's hit a wall here. He doesn't know what to do. And you can see in the post-fight press conference, he wins handily, but Dana's going off. And Anderson's like, I did my thing. I won. I had a plan.
So let me ask you this. It's hard to make sense of all of it because, as we've said, in interviews, Silva's joking around one interview. In the next, he's given a one-word answer. In one fight, he's knocking a guy out while backpedaling. In the next, he's dancing around and showboating and won't engage. So you have this extreme juxtaposition, but it all seems to rest on his shoulders, right? It all falls back on him. So even though he's winning these fights handily, he's still, his boss is threatening to fire him after a handed victory. Like, he won handily, but he's going to threaten to let him go. My question for you is this his own doing by being so spectacular in so many fights prior to this? There's an expectation that that's going to continue. And when it doesn't, fans are extremely upset with Anderson. Forget the showboating part. Just not finishing Maia. Just not finishing light as there's nothing you can do. Anderson's not going to jump in someone's guard that literally only can submit him
Just
and
as
do nothing
Fedor,
else.
that's how you get triangled by Verdun.
Exactly. So is Silva at fault because Cote tore his ACL or whatever he tore? Is Silva at fault that Lainez fell on his back 45 times in the fight? No, he's not. He shouldn't be held accountable for that. So what can he be held accountable for? Well, like you said, for dancing and showboating and pretending that there was nothing going on. He's putting on a show, or he thinks he is, and really he's doing more harm than he's doing good.
Yep.
Well, make no mistake, like every single one of Anderson's tactics actions in the ring is a tactic. Nobody hates the clowning shit more than I do. I absolutely hate it. I despise it. It's the worst part about fighting, and not many people do it. And then Anderson started doing this, and it became a bit of one of the tactics that he pulled out on a regular basis. And man, it amped my hatred for him through the roof because I can't stand this shit. That being said, yeah, he's trying to draw him out. Anderson is a very much pick your spots kind of guy. Like you mentioned, he'll sit back in that first minute and a half. He'll read you. He'll see what you're doing, and then he'll beat you. And so, yeah, he's not going to put himself or the fight at risk by making a dumb move. He's going to wait for his spot. And if it doesn't appear, he's going to do whatever it takes to draw you out. So it is absolutely a valid tactic that I hate with every fiber of my being. But it's, hey, he won. Like, what are you going to do? He's not going to do something stupid, put his legacy title lifeline on the risk, or, well, that was that one. Yeah, he's not going to risk this all. Wow, this fell apart majestically. Wow, it's a swan. So, yeah, he's not going to make all these dumb decisions just so he can finish a fight. Maybe there's a 50% chance he finishes it in spectacular fashion, or he gets caught in a guard. What are you going to do?
Make no mistake about it, my perception of this fight absolutely 100% changed during this research. I really did always hold this against him and think he was clowning around and could have beaten Maia. And rewatching it, including the highlights, I really... Jake, you got that over there? Jake just...
This is the most confusing chair I've ever seen in my life.
Jake's falling apart.
I'm out. Bring Zach back.
Yeah, you're going to take a break.
Call Zach in.
No, but I absolutely 100% think that Maia refused to engage, and Anderson had no choice. And you watch, it's so deliberate. He is, like you said, he's trying to bring him out. He's trying to get him to strike with him.
He even did it in the Forrest fight, and I was actually more upset with him as a fan in the Forrest fight. I think he was a little more disrespectful because Forrest was engaging, and he would knock Forrest to the ground, and then he would offer to help him up.
Oh.
Remember that? He would reach out his hand to try to help Forrest off the ground. And it's not the same as what Max Holloway did. For some reason, it feels less, I don't know, it feels classless.
Yeah.
It really does. But in the Maia fight, I do believe that there was a strategy. I do believe, like you said, Jake, he was trying to goad Maia into engaging because he was slapping Maia around like nobody's business in those first couple of rounds. And then when Maia started going to his own game plan, Silva was no longer the dominant fighter he was in the earlier rounds. So he's trying to do everything he can without taking any real risk at that point.
Yep.
Because even when Anderson plays someone else's game, even when he beats the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy at his own game, or as we'll see in the Stephan Bonner fight, beats him the one way everyone said not to fight, he's calculated. He knows he can do it. He's never going to step outside and put himself in any real danger. So this is just another example of that. But yeah, it's not good when Dana's threatening to cut him. But luckily for Silva, Dana would not stay true to his word here. And Silva's next opponent would not only bring out the best in him, but he would light a fire underneath him. You see, prior to this point, Silva had never had a true test inside or outside the octagon. All of his fights at this level are, of course, a test to some degree. But for those watching at home, Silva had seemed to walk through his opponents the way superheroes do alleyway criminals. But now, Silva was about to meet his first true rival, a man who not only didn't fear him, but laughed at him. A Division I All-American wrestler with a mean double leg, and a man who had been calling for Silva's head for years.
Do you guys remember From Dusk Till Dawn? Do you guys
Absolutely.
remember how like halfway through it turned into like a totally different movie? It was like an action movie, and then it turned into a horror movie. Taylor thinks we're doing Anderson Part 2. This is about to just turn into Chael, Son, and Untold.
Yeah,
this is a
little do you know.
totally different podcast. Chael is the fucking man.
I will not let that happen.
I just popped some alpha brain, so there's going to be no more slip ups for me. Yeah, absolutely. Let's head into Chael Untold.
Say,
right
Taylor,
now.
if you want to make some more coffee over there.
We'll take it from here
got
on
it,
out.
you guys
Yeah.
go.
We got it from here.
Go ahead, both of you.
So this is again kind of the master stroke by Dana. Is he finds a guy, Anderson's in this weird ride here. We're on that roller coaster, and Dana finds a brash guy who can talk a ton of shit and who just runs right at people and tries to take them down. So in a way, he's punishing Anderson because he's sending a wrestler at him, and they had sort of been protecting him with these strikers, and it's good. That's promoting, right? Not that Anderson needed protection. However, Chael himself would say Anderson was picking a lot of fights. That's behind-the-scenes stuff, can't be verified. But the word is, especially when we get to the second Chael fight, that Anderson's being extremely picky. Chael's pointing that out. He's an aggressive wrestler. He is built to give Anderson problems and rile him up outside of the cage and talk a ton of shit.
It's a really interesting juxtaposition between Chael's, goading and use of his phenomenal just words, like his wordplay. He gets under people's skin and it bugs them through the camp, through the fight, and then well, of course with Chael it's never over. But and then Anderson is generally more soft spoken, doesn't really hype up to the fight, and then in the cage he clowns them, So it's a weird, it's a weird juxtaposition, and they're all valid. I happen to agree with one a little bit. For some reason, it's a lot easier for me to get behind someone trash talking you, talking shit, and then in the fight respectfully rather than vice versa, what Anderson does. But make no mistake, to this point, Anderson was really, really good. And in my head, in my head canon, like, oh, we got to find someone to beat him. So we bring in all these fighters that I really like and want to win, like Dan Henderson and Forrest Griffin. And those two guys are maybe two of my top 5 favorite fighters. And then comes along Chael, and I have never wanted anyone to win a fight more than I wanted Chael to beat Anderson. The only other one that comes close is Randy Couture beating that piece of shit Tim Sylvia.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, and Chael had been calling Anderson out since the WEC. I mean, and that's what made it even crazier for people that had watched the WEC, because you're like, oh, I remember when this guy was like fighting Paulo Filo, calling out Anderson Silva, and he's now made it. That's the best part of sports, is you're like, that little guy from that show actually made it all the way to Anderson. And the thing about Chael is, a lot of people just remember this late career Chael where he's saying shit that's just illogical. It's way out of control. I'm undefeated. I never lost my belt. The belt he didn't even have, calling himself the champion, saying ridiculous shit. This version of Chael was fucking outstanding. Like, when you hear the trash talk, it's brutal. Like, and he knows how to dig. He knows how to make those comments about, like, oh, Anderson likes to act like he bows and tries to act like that. He goes, he doesn't come from a place where they bow. If you bow, they'll, pick your pocket and run away and punch you. And you're like, dude, he just knows
a little
what to
too
say.
Close to home, yeah.
And you can see it digging at Anderson, man. And so he is like, this version of Chael, this is the original McGregor, and this is why Chael went from a nobody to like an overnight draw, because at every corner he's embarrassing Anderson at the shit talking, to the point where they get to that one conference and Anderson's just answering no to every question. And what I loved about that documentary is they get some honest moments with Ed Soares, and he's on the phone with Dana, and Dana's like, in an honest moment, saying like, look, if this guy loses to Chael, maybe it is best if we cut him for real, because this guy's not even playing ball. Chael, you can hear on the other end of the phone in this conference, Chael's talking all sorts of funny shit, and Anderson's just, you doing anything different? No. Has he bothered you at all? No. It just no. And you're like, man, he has fucked Anderson up. So this was an awesome build, and then the fight started.
Well, just before we let's push off talking about the fight as long as possible.
You sons of bitches, get to it.
Keep working on that coffee, Taylor.
Get to the fight.
Don't worry about it. It just kind of exposed a bit of a weakness in Anderson, because Anderson is a bit of a head case, and like Chael, like no one else, is really good at just absolutely 100% in your head. And it was a perfect blueprint to beat Anderson. He was so under his skin, and his strengths were Anderson's weaknesses. And man, my hopes were pretty high for this thing.
Well, I will say this: no one had gotten into Anderson's head prior to this, and I don't really remember anyone trying to. So this is the first time that Anderson has been tested outside of the cage leading up to a fight. And it's the weird thing. You challenge somebody like that. You question their ability. You question them as a person, as a human, as a father, a family man. And one of two things is going to happen. You're going to bring out the best in them, or you're going to get in their head and you're going to rattle them and you're going to have the upper hand. I don't know what happened here. I by all accounts, Chael got in his head and did have the upper hand and probably fought a better fight than he would if they fought 10 other times. This was the culmination of everything. It was the right moment. And I remember watching this fight in Texas I think it was at my aunt and uncle's house, and was watching this fight. And I remember sitting there with a baffled look on my face thinking, this can't be real. This isn't happening. And not because I didn't think Anderson could be beat, but because it just didn't look like Anderson Silva. It looked like a different person in their fighting. And he gets knocked down by punches. He gets taken down. He's not throwing kicks. He's not throwing punches. He's not moving the right way. And I think at one point I even texted you and said, something's up. This seems fake. This seems rigged.
Yeah, you thought it was fixed.
I thought
Full
it was
disclosure.
a fixed fight.
Yeah.
I really did.
Because we were texting, we got it back home, and you and I were texting the whole time. We were stunned as it was happening. Obviously, it was a goddamn party at our place. We're super happy.
After each round, we're like, well, Chael won, right? Yeah, it's 10-9. It's got to be 10-9, yeah.
But yeah, you thought it was fixed.
I mean, if you haven't seen the fight, all 5 rounds, Chael dominates Anderson Silva. For 5 rounds, he dominates him until the last minute and a half of the fight. And then Silva puts on one of the most spectacular submissions I think I've ever seen. Because it's a Hail Mary. I mean, it's not just that it's in the winding moments of the fight, but it's in the winding moments of a fight that he is losing, and it's his entire legacy on the line. We've seen guys submit other guys with 1 second to go in a fight, and it's pretty phenomenal. But most of the time, they're winning the fight, or they're on a 1-fight win streak. This is a guy who's, I don't even know what fight win streak he's on at this point, but this is the pound for pound best fighter in the world at the time, about to lose everything. And then with a minute to go,
yeah,
he pulls it
110
out.
seconds is all he had to, is to hold on for.
Oh, it's so heartbreaking. Even, take the names out of it, Anderson and Chael, just go with what happened to Chael. That's hard to deal with, and look, he's definitely had some issues since with popping for the PEDs for this very fight. So he isn't necessarily the good guy here as much as we want him to be, but that is devastating to live with that the rest of your life. I mean, he had beaten what was kind of the Michael Jordan possibly of MMA at that point, and nope, just buckled at the last second. And that was kind of Chael's MO, and I'm sure that'll be the eventual Chael Untold, And
I don't want to talk about it. I'm
Do you want to talk about
now.
the rib? I mean, just
well,
because we should.
You should start with it, because you were the one that brought it to my attention at first, the rib.
Well, so yeah, they talk about it in the documentary, so it's not BS. Because sometimes if you were dealing with a Tito or somebody else, you would think that this was an excuse. But after the fight, it comes out that Anderson's ribs were bruised or fractured, or something was going on with his ribs prior to the Chael fight. And against doctor wishes, he still takes the fight.
Well, so you had brought this to my attention a long time ago, and at the point you brought it up, I was kind of a little upset with Chael, because this was during the spiral, PED spiral, money laundering spiral. A couple issues came up, and for a long time I thought it was super serious. But when I mentioned this last time, I had not watched this fight since it happened, and when I watched that documentary, I just, it's like when your buddy sends you like loose change or zeitgeist, and you just go down that fucking rabbit hole, and afterwards you're like partially ashamed of yourself.
I'm watching Zeitgeist right after this.
100%. You're in like a super weird place. I went down the rabbit hole, man. I watched that. I watched the documentary, watched the fight, and I was I was just Googling like the rib injury, and this guy did a breakdown. This is the loose change part of this podcast. This guy broke the rounds down, and he compared how Anderson fought in this fight to past fights. And he breaks it down round by round, and he basically says, look, the bottom line is it wasn't the ribs. And when you listen, he was hurt, and then it was amazing what he did with the ribs being hurt, but it comes down to that heavy hand by Chael in the beginning. Chael lands, just like Khabib landed, right? It's like the wrestling distracts him, and Chael lands a massive bomb, and Anderson's fucked up for a while, man. And Chael dominates from there, but in the end, the superior skill won out. Anderson's the better fighter no matter which way you cut it.
Without a doubt. And this is, once again, another one of those times where years later, I'm willing to admit that that's the truth. There was no fix. It really wasn't because of Anderson's ribs, although I have been told by guys who play football, by guys who've done combat sports, bruised ribs are almost debilitating. I mean, it's almost to the point where you can't just function in your normal life, much less take a fight against a professional fighter. That being said, I agree. He pushed through the injury and could have fought his fight, but Chael got the better of him. It's just the truth.
Yeah. I mean, when you see him, to me, if he got a shot, whatever he did to get through, I think worked. But the bottom line is, man, it's a 25-minute fight. And with somebody as skilled as Anderson, all it does take is that one slip up with 1 minute to go, and you're fucked, man. And man,
yeah, there's no finish line until that bell rings.
I mean, that's an all-time MMA moment. It's so hard for me to watch. It was hard to go down that road again, but I knew I had to. And like, that's a top 5-3, top 2 MMA moment. I mean, that's madness. Like him or hate him, it is the Brazilian hero going in for 5 rounds, getting his ass beat against the guy that's talked so much shit about his country, his family, everything, and then with 1 minute to go, beating the cheater.
Is that the fight he wore the gi to the ring in? So Chael is talking about the Nogueiras getting their, what was it, their accolade, their jiu-jitsu accolades from a cereal box or something to that effect, essentially inferring that the Nogueiras had no credibility when it came to jiu-jitsu. And that's, again, not our culture, but that's very, very insulting. Of all the things Chael said to Anderson and about him, that was one of the more insulting things in the eyes of Anderson Silva, because at this point, the Nogueiras have essentially saved him. He was ready, as we said in part 1, to give up fighting, and now he's at the top of the sport. And he says he owes it all to the Nogueiras. And so for Chael to disrespect them, he really took it personally. So he comes down to the ring in his gi with his black belt. And Nogueira says before the fight, right? Like, you're going to knock him out. You're going to destroy him. And he says, no, I'm going to submit him. And then they say, no, you're going to knock him out. And Barrett, just stick to your, and he says, no, I'm going to submit him. So it just adds to that legacy and the lore there.
And don't forget, Jake, this is also the first time he had your boy Steven Seagal in his corner. Watch out.
Now, would you say that Chael was on deadly ground?
You son of a bitch. I love, my favorite part is Rogan's reaction when he realizes it's Steven Seagal. And he's just like, is that actually Steven Seagal? And Goldie's like, yeah, it is. And he's just like, oh my God. It's this amazing fight, big moment. You realize Steven Seagal's out there just all out of shape. And
Jake, I'll let you talk about Seagal in a minute here. I
have a last. I could talk about Seagal all day. And my next podcast is actually a Steven Seagal retrospective. So it's fine. We're recording in about 2 hours. So I think that Silva should be, if he doesn't send Chael like a gift basket every Christmas, he should, because that narrative was turning a little bit on Silva. He was good, but then the fight before, he kind of got this reputation as clowning. Dana's all over him, all this kind of stuff. And then Chael comes in and as he does, paints himself as the bad guy, paints Silva as this, really highlights the soft-spoken, gentle, good guy. And like it totally, and then there's this come from behind victory for Silva. Like this is, even though he didn't really fight his fight until that last, 10 seconds of it, it totally flips the script and gets Silva back on track for his narrative. No.
Yeah, let's go in here. Let's go back into Chael Untold. You're spot on, because He played the game. He calls himself the bad guy. I used to get upset when he would call himself the bad guy because I'm like, no, dude, you're amazing. But no, he was so good at it. And he truly did paint himself as the bad guy. And when you look back on it, he made Anderson the hero. And not he didn't lose on purpose. That was never the plan, but it worked. And, years later, he tries to do it with Vanderlei on Tough. And he's said in numerous podcasts since that like Vanderlei would take it way too seriously and flip the fuck out to the point where the Brazilian fans turned on Vanderlei. And Chael's like, "Hey, idiot, you're the good guy.
I'm handing this to you on a silver
helping you."
platter. He's the best promoter. He's just flat out the best.
That's the thing.
Fight promoter.
I think Conor McGregor is fucking phenomenal at promoting Conor McGregor and his fight. Chael is a goddamn promoter. There was that talk that he could eventually replace Dana, and we were stunned when they let him go to Bellator because when you see how he can promote and the picture he can paint, dude, that's the guy, man. He was the future.
Yeah, so the first time in Silva's UFC career, he had overcome real adversity, and as you said, he had done so as the hero. So Chael had painted himself as the villain, and now this soft-spoken Brazilian has now risen and become the hero. But there's another underlying story that would rear its head in Silva's next fight. And that story was one of poverty, class, nationality, and fame. See, Silva had become a star in the U.S. thanks to Chael, but back in Brazil, Silva was still second fiddle. Though he had defended the honor of his people and the Nogueiras, Brazil already had a hero, and it had been that way since the 90s when Vitor Belfort burst onto the scene. But it was 2011 now, and Anderson Silva was the best fighter in the world, so why weren't his own people embracing him? For that to happen, Silva would have to beat Belfort and take his crown. But Silva was out for more than Belfort's crown. He was out to shame Belfort in the process.
This is almost like the real Playboy, right? I mean, he was calling Maya Playboy, but that's who Vitor is. It was that long article we referenced in part 1 of this. It's just a crazy story. We should probably consider tweeting it out because it's an amazing story.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Awesome. It's well worth the read. It's well worth the time. But Vitor is, in a sense, everything that Anderson wanted to be. Vitor is the, everyone's favorite fighter out there. He's a true celebrity. He's on the shows. You can go listen to the 2-parter we did on him. They love him out there. And he's calm, cool, collected. He doesn't get upset when people get in his face. Anderson's always trying to get to that point. Anderson's trying to act like he doesn't care. He's giving one-word answers. I don't care. I don't give a shit. It's the same thing as always. But then you see him, and you see him get rattled. And you're like, oh, he's just playing it cool. He's not actually cool with this. He wants to be Vitor, and he tries to make him pay for it. To the point is that this is the mask, right? This is definitely your department, because I remember when he shows up in the mask, I'm like, what the fuck is this psycho doing?
Do you remember the mask, Jake?
I think I blocked that out. No.
So at the weigh-in, he goes up to the scale, and this was back when they actually weighed in at the same time and faced off, and this was before the morning weigh-ins. So he went up there and weighs in and then has a Jabberwocky mask on top of his head. And then when he goes to face off against Vitor, he pulls it down and presses it right up against Vitor's face.
Jake is furious right now.
I'm livid.
He's like red.
I never wanted to hear the word Jabberwocky again in my entire life for one.
Let alone with Anderson involved.
Idiots.
So there was a lot going on here. There's really a lot going on. So there's all the class stuff going on. Anderson's jealousy of Vitor. There's also Anderson went to a Jabberwocky's concert, got a mask. He went with his son. So he took his son to see the Jabberwockies. He got a mask. His son was playing with it when they're sitting, because the fighters will sit kind of in the bleachers, right? Hang out before weigh-ins and stuff. So they go backstage. They're sitting there, and his son hands it to him and tells him to wear it. So he takes the mask, puts it on. It seems like it was sort of a last-second thing, but then there's all these articles about Vitor saying that Anderson wore a mask, that he was fake, that he wasn't who he said he was, that there's all this stuff going on behind the scenes. So then it's Anderson putting on the mask and saying, okay, here you go. Here's my mask. So I don't know what it is. Or maybe was it Anderson saying Vitor wore a mask? I can't even remember at this point.
I think so. It was all fucked up.
I don't remember. Listen, this fight is insane. What happens before the fight, what happens in the fight. this is the chance for you to talk about your boy Steven Seagal. Because
Front snap kick. 3 little words. I'm pretty sure that Steven Seagal invented the front kick, so let's just get that out there. This is a phenomenal knockout, and is it just riddle me this? Is it coincidence that Machida and Anderson are great friends and training partners, and they both win fights with the front snap kick? All of a sudden, Steven Seagal is involved. All I'm saying, he better got a portion of that fight purse, or maybe that's how he's funding Under Siege 3.
It all makes sense.
Full circle. This brought me back from the Jabberwocky thing.
I'm sorry.
This is great.
They haven't come up in like 5 years of my life now. Is that they still have like the residency or whatever? They were like full on in Vegas. Like,
no idea.
think if we ever get credentialed, we can go to a Jabberwocky show and then wear the mask to the fights.
I'm gonna hang one in the studio.
There we go.
You watch out.
Now we're talking. But let's be fair. You debunked the Steven Seagal thing, right? Didn't you find a Maya article?
Well, Damian Maya debunked it. I mean, and I would assume there's plenty of other people, but this is one of those things. This is the Blair Witch Project. This is there's a lot with this. Yeah, watch out, Jake. I'm going to compare this to the Blair Witch Project.
Why am I in a corner?
So, for those of you who weren't around when that movie first came out, there was a lot of articles and viral marketing going on, and then there was people on both sides of it. There was people that were skeptical, but that truly believed the Blair Witch was based on a true story.
Did you believe it?
I don't recall. I was going into college, I think, at that point, and I'm sure at one point I read it and thought, okay, that's real. I take it at its word. And then you start to hear more and read more, and then you start to become skeptical, and then you eventually go the other way.
Fully off the rails. Do you guys remember that website?
Oh,
that was fucking phenomenal. For people who were, it may still be up, which I'm going to Google right after. It was phenomenal because you'd go to it and it was fully committed to the found footage. Like, hey, these kids are missing. Like, here's the information. If anybody has information on the disappearance of these 3 people, and it didn't have in the corner like sponsored by Paramount Entertainment. It was not. It was legit. And I remember conversations like where we knew it was a movie and it was fake, but there's a little bit of like, I mean, this isn't real, right? There was a dialogue.
Didn't they have to address it?
Yeah,
like,
at some point,
I think they made them address like, hey, it isn't, because people were so fucking confused. We were just
when you advertise that something's based on a true story, and then you have a website dedicated to the true story, you believe it. And that's what's going on here.
Because everything on the internet is true.
Yeah, exactly.
So good friend of the podcast, we have a buddy named Dave, and he's a Blair Witch psycho. And I just want to say, it was funny because they just made a new one, right? They just did the reboot that everyone hated on for no reason. And in it, he's like, look, you got to see this subreddit. So he shows me like the original Blair Witch subreddit. And you want to talk about a rabbit hole. People are like defending the lore. And I'm like, man, this is a whole section of the world that just spends hours and hours a day talking about the Blair Witch. I love it.
Does anyone defend that second movie that we pretend
they try
exist?
to say
Dave
he
does.
will. Book of Shadows, he loves it. But no, it's hilarious seeing all the people out there that are, the lore is pretty good. He's right. Sorry, back to your boy.
Well, so the way that I tie that into Anderson Silva is just that the Steven Seagal thing was a joke, but the fans watching were they thought it was kind of a mockery. They thought it was a joke, but then you also kind of wonder if there's any truth to it, if Steven Seagal did teach him. So we've kind of gotten off track here, but Anderson kicks Vitor in the face.
Yes.
Big time. And Vitor falls to the canvas, and really no one had seen anything like that up to that point. And so everyone's in shock, and there's Steven Seagal and all of these videos and articles coming out saying that Seagal taught him the kick, that Anderson was practicing it. Anderson says that Steven taught him the kick.
Just feeding it.
So, I mean, it's a big marketing gimmick, but it was really, that's just Anderson Silva for you. You just really can never tell where the truth where the lies meet the truth with him.
That's just one of those moments too, watching that fight where your foot's totally in your mouth, because I remember as it was starting, it was again as another slow start and everybody was just so ready to rip on Anderson. I remember how vindicating it was for you, because people were like throwing a fit at our place at the this is what he does, it's like a computer, and then just boom, kick to the face. It was like, okay, everyone shut the fuck up.
That was a clear Casey Ryback move. That was classic Casey Ryback.
So, and this is the time, obviously, once that happens, he becomes a star and he starts getting deals with Nike, with Burger King, with Corinthians. So he blows up with this kick. So it's the kick heard round the world, and Joe Rogan's voice echoes in the ears of every mixed martial arts fan that was watching at the time. And the people in Brazil had finally taken notice, and Silva was a star. And next on Silva's hit list was Yushin Okami. Silva's last loss had come to Okami 5 years earlier via DQ. So Silva was out to avenge that loss and set the record straight, and he would do just that, finishing Okami in the second round with playful ease. Now, Silva had erased all doubts except for one. There were many who still believed Chael Sonnen had battered Silva, and though he hadn't technically won the fight, he had established himself as Silva's kryptonite. So at UFC 136, with Anderson sitting cage side, Chael Sonnen defeated Brian Stand and promptly took the mic from Joe Rogan to say this.
Anderson Silva, you absolutely suck. Super Bowl weekend, the biggest rematch in the history of the business. I'm calling you out, Silva, but we're up in the stakes. I beat you. You leave the division. You beat me. I will leave the UFC forever.
And that's why we say Chael might be one of the greatest promoters of all time. I mean, that just gets everybody fucking fired up. Even if you hate him, now you want to see that second fight. The build-up for the second fight was awesome because, again, you're thinking the whole time as an Anderson hater that Chael hasn't figured out. It was a fluky loss. They wanted originally to do it, I want to say, in a soccer stadium in Brazil. There's some crazy fucking stories that Brian Stans told. Jake, I don't know if we've ever actually talked about this even off mic, but like when they wanted to do that in Brazil, they were so worried about Chael's safety.
I do recall
Do you
that
remember
at the time.
That
yeah.
like Brian Stan, there was like 3 people in the entire UFC in the loop on as they were starting to map it out, like what Chael's travel plans would have been. And they were going to divert him on like a fake flight. They were going to book him tickets on a flight he wouldn't be in, cars he wouldn't be in. And only like 3 people in the entire organization were going to know where he was, what hotel, what flight he was on.
That's insane.
That just sounds like a Steven Seagal movie.
Well, okay. And back to Under Siege 3.
Is that real? Yeah, that really happened.
No,
huh?
that is real. And Brian Stan's about as fucking legit as it gets. And it would make sense with his military background that he'd be in on it, actually.
And that consequently is the plot of 2004's Out of Reach. So this is all, again,
damn
full circle.
Well, so, I mean, Chael was saying some outrageous stuff at this point.
Yeah.
About Anderson in the buildup. I mean, he was really over the top. And this is, again, he drew out the very best / worst in Anderson Silva by doing this, because this is the second fight is when you have Anderson making comments to media. I'm going to knock his teeth out. I'm going to kill him.
Yeah.
It was really kind of uncharacteristic of Anderson.
And like we mentioned earlier, this is where Anderson's getting real picky. He wants to fight in certain places, certain times. He doesn't want, he doesn't respect Chael. He doesn't want to fight him. And they're like forcing his hand. He was getting a little picky here. This is, again, the hype, the belief in himself. This persona is growing right now, right? He's starting to think he's going to play matchmaker. And I get it, right? I mean, it's his show, but these are those signs, those little red flags that you start to wonder if something's going to go down, and we'll see eventually it does, but they get the rematch made, and it's not what we hope for. Well, me and Jake at least.
Yeah, and there was some, like you said, kind of the picking fights thing. Silva didn't want to fight Sonnen a second time at all. And there was some heated discussions between him and Dana because there's an article out there that discusses they were supposed to have it in Brazil, like you said. They changed the event to Las Vegas, and Silva is livid because he's the guy in Brazil now. All of this work and all of this effort to top Vitor, and he had finally done it, and he's going to fight Chael again, and it's going to be in Brazil in front of the home fans. And now they're switching it to Las Vegas in Chael's backyard, essentially. And Silva's pissed. He's very angry, but Dana White's able to calm him down and say, look, this is going to be in front of tons of fans as well. You're going to be the man. Go in there, beat him, take care of business. And Silva agrees to it.
To be honest, this is where I would normally spend 5-10 minutes bitching and moaning about what a stupid mistake it was to not have that fight in Brazil. But the reality is, it probably wasn't safe for Chael. They probably made the right move, and they probably lost a lot of money doing it, like bringing it here, because if they were going to sell at a soccer stadium, they were going to make a shitload of cash. So in reality, because I actually feel for Anderson in this case. He is now the hero there, and that sucks. He should get to go beat his rival there. There's a bunch of people like Aldo who got to, fight Mendez on his home turf. Like all these people got to do it on their home turf. It sucks he didn't get to, but I get
GSP in Canada.
Yes,
like,
and it's like
every other fight.
It's like a coronation. It's an awesome moment, and it sucks that he'll get to fight there in a big fight here shortly. But again, that sucks. But I get it. It was not safe.
But it did a ton of pay-per-view buys.
Yes.
It was a huge fight. I think the biggest at the time, or one of the biggest at the time.
Yeah,
Top three.
And I said it didn't go as we wanted, but to be honest, the first round, Chael kicked his ass again, and you're going, okay, here we go. But the problem is you start every round standing, and Chael threw like a fucking spinning back fist, and boom, the whole thing fell apart.
All over after that.
See
so
ya.
So Silva beats Chael in the second round, and once again, he's silenced his critics, and once again, he's cleaned out his division. So now it's time to have a little bit of fun. It's time to move back up to light heavyweight and take on Stephan Bonnar. And it was here where Silva would once again display his true artistry and submit himself as the pound-for-pound best to ever do it.
So he saves a card here. This is supposed to be a Vitor card in Brazil. This is supposed to be Aldo was supposed to be on it, but he pulled out due to injury. So he steps in, fights Bonnar, moves up a weight class, fights another guy that everyone's saying could be a problem because of his size, and he flat out puts his own back against the cage, fights the fight Bonnar would want to fight.
The fight that people said, so people going into this fight said, look, Bonnar's the bigger guy, but skill-wise, Anderson, there's no question Anderson's the better fighter. If Bonnar stands any chance of beating Silva, he needs to get Silva backed up against the cage and needs to put his weight on him and sort of dirty box him and beat Silva that way. So the fight starts, Silva does his thing, and then Silva starts backing up and puts his back on the cage, puts his arms out flat, and motions to Stephan Bonnar, come on. Come fight me here where everyone says you can beat me. Let's go.
It was fucking awesome because, again, full disclosure, it was written against Anderson. And the minute I'm sitting there going, well, I mean, at least we're getting to hang out with our buddies and have fun, watch the fights, but this main event sucks. The minute he does that, I'm like, oh shit, this is going to be crazy because this is the one spot where Bonnar could possibly hurt him. Not even fucking close. Absolute bloodbath. So did not live. Well, you know what? It did live up to the hype because Anderson showed what he can fucking do.
Yeah, and I said this is Anderson cementing himself as the pound for pound best at this time. This is when look, he's reached rarefied air. And he's being compared to the likes of Jordan, Muhammad Ali, Gretzky, and others. And fans are all over mixed martial arts forums and message boards, tirelessly debating if he's the best of all time. So if he's not consensus-wise the best of all time, he's in the discussion, and there's an argument to be made for him at this point. And even Anderson is starting to believe his own hype here, because in previous interviews, when asked who was the greatest fighter of all time, Silva had always responded with this.
My opinion is the BJ Penn is the best. The best pound per pound is BJ Penn. BJ, my opinion, is the best fighter in the world. My opinion, the best fighting in the world is BJ Penn.
But now reporters had stopped asking and changed the question to who's left for you to fight? Who can possibly beat you? So with a slight grin and a shrug of his shoulders, Silva responds, my clone?
Oof. The red flags are everywhere now. The hype is there. You know, he's going to start talking about the Roy Jones Jr. talk is going to come back very heavily now. It's actually serious at this point. The red flags are everywhere. He's walking around with the entourage at all times. Again, these are the scary things. As an Anderson fan, was it scary for you at the time, or was it hard to notice?
It's just, as an Anderson fan during this period, despite all the weird fights and the things people held against him, I didn't ignore those things, but I wrote those off as, look, Anderson's respectful before and after the fight. In the fight, it's a fist fight. I don't care what he does. I don't care if he does the chicken dance from Arrested Development in the middle of the fight.
Which one? Nothing wrong with
any
that.
of them.
Cha, chee, cha.
But it really doesn't matter. You're in a cage and somebody's trying to physically harm you. I don't care what you do, as long as you're respectful before and after. So I had always defended Anderson's character, but and I always thought he was a humble individual, and I believe to some degree he was. He was maybe just confused and maybe hurt by his upbringing and by some other people, a little bit jealous. But this is where his ego really starts to come out, and that's tough. You really don't like to see that. Unless a guy has established himself as the bad guy or as the egomaniac, but when somebody's thought to be the good guy and then he changes and you see this different side or maybe the real side of them come out, it's tough.
It's like, well, I get what you're saying, because it's like Floyd, right? That's his whole gimmick. He's Money Mayweather. He's the bad guy inside and outside of the ring. Anderson was playing the good guy. He seemed to be a good guy. You know, there's these weird moments here or there where you start to question it, but this is where it started to get a bit odd. And look, hey, in his defense, at this point, I'm a big believer. First of all, the GOAT talk drives us insane. But at this point in time, I'm a big believer in that kind of conversation is all about your resume and how those people did, like the strength of schedule. How did they do even after you fought them? Did you catch someone on the tail end? One of your gripes with John Jones is a lot of these guys were done. They were washed and he beat them on their way out. That's one of my big things with Conor McGregor is you look at the Holloways, the Poiriers, the Aldos, they all are still relevant. Eddie Alvarez, I know he just left to go to one, still relevant. Conor beat all these people that still mattered after. Look at Anderson. A lot of these fighters that people talk shit about, they were relevant afterwards. Damian Maia had an incredible second act. Talis had a really good second act, made it all the way up to a big fight with Bisping. Chael hung around, beat like a shogun. A lot of these guys hang around. I'm probably missing a few in there. But the point is, his hype is real. He deserved the hype because these people were not washed. Even Patrick Cote had another little run where he got relevant again. So he was catching people in their prime.
And those fights that people complain about, we say it all the time, you can only fight who's being put in front of you. Yep. So for every detractor of Silva's resume up to this point, the only thing you can say is he was fighting the guys the UFC was giving him, and he was moving weight classes in between. I mean, the guy has the most title defenses, and we are not counting Mighty Mouse. He has the most title defenses, and his very first title defense didn't count because his counterpart couldn't make weight. And he's taken 3 fights at light heavyweight in between those fights. If he had done the Mighty Mouse and just stayed at middleweight and fought the next guy in line, he would have at least 3 more, if not 4 more title defenses than he currently has.
Hey, you know how I just said I was forgetting someone? Fucking TRT Vitor. I know this was right when Vitor gets the exemption, but he's on all the sauce in the world at this point. Look at his physique. We know what he looks like when he's not on it. Anderson kicks him in the fucking face. Then he goes on the run, who many people say that run of Vitor is the scariest fighter ever, including Joe Rogan, who actively says TRT Vitor was the scariest fighter ever. Anderson beats him right when that's going on, right when that's about to start, let's say. So he beat people during and before their runs, or, during their run, I should just say. It was phenomenal.
But with the clone talk, it starts to get a little bit weird. And even though he's saying it in true Silva fashion, it's always a little bit tongue-in-cheek. He never says anything with serious conviction unless he's talking about Chael Sonnen. There's always a little joking behind him. So you're never sure where to land. You don't know what you're actually getting. Like I said, where the truth and the lies meet.
It's like when I ask my wife if she wants dessert with her dinner, and it's a half joking answer, and you're like, I should have got the Rice Krispie treat. I should.
Hey, note to all married men out there: always get the Rice Krispie treat.
Get it? Yeah,
Get it. Yeah, she's not joking.
Or
She
the
wants that-
tiramisu in
Yeah.
my house.
Yeah,
That's,
It can't hurt to get it.
never hurts. So despite the talk of other ventures like Roy Jones Jr. and maybe moving up for a super fight with John Jones or moving down to fight GSP, Silva would take on just the next challenger at middleweight as he had always done. But the next deserving challenger wasn't clear, and talks of several possible opponents surfaced. But after a series of strange events, the UFC settled on a young wrestler from Long Island with a record of just 9-0. And Silva would refer to his opponent as just a child, a kid, in the lead up to the fight. But sometimes the young have a way of surprising us. And we'll end part 2 here, essentially. So that is the reign of Anderson Silva. Next week, we'll wrap up the series with part 3, the fall of Anderson Silva. And I really wanted to skip part 3, but the Godfather pressed, and so we move forward. So any final comments on Anderson before we sign off here?
The reign, when we started this research, when we started to talk about how we'd break this up, I wasn't sure how an episode like this would work. But like I said at the beginning of this, it is a fascinating, the whole thing's a damn roller coaster, from the promotional side to the rivalries with Chael and Vitor. It's funny because at the time, it's like we never appreciate greatness. I'm the guy that was I'm in Chicago hating on Michael Jordan until the end when everyone turns on him, and I'm like, you're all fucking idiots. He's amazing. Literally.
The Wizards are awesome.
Yeah, all in on the Wizards. But, at the time, we're shitting on it, saying it's boring, his fights suck, and then you look back on it and you're like, oh man, this was out of control. And the story itself of this run is madness. So it did deserve its own episode. And I do believe more than ever that he did have a case for being the greatest of all time. This is maybe the greatest run of all time. So it was really fun to kind of break it down and take a look. It was a fascinating time.
So I guess my final comment, just off the top of my head, the Silva story, he's a good man with maximum conviction who's born to raise hell. He's a dangerous man that at the end of a gun can be driven to kill.
Are you just reading the plot?
He has a strict code of honor. He's really, he, as we'll see in part 3, he's not above the law. He finds his title and his legacy under siege. And most importantly, up until this point, he's been the perfect weapon. And for those of you counting at home, that those are 10 Steven Seagal movies.
You son of a bitch.
I cannot believe you just rattled that off.
He's been waiting all day for that.
Oh, my God. As I said last episode, without that handlebar mustache, I don't know if I would tolerate half of the things you say.
I might have just cemented myself as the greatest pound-for-pound podcast guest of all time. That was phenomenal.
It was phenomenal. I don't know where the fuck it came from.
20 minutes ago, you were calling for Zach to come back.
Yeah, and now he just comes back.
That alpha brain kicked right in.
Yeah,
I'm
it
on
did.
it. Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, 2 men fighting inside a steel cage isn't for everyone, but stories like Anderson Silva's are. This is MMA Untold, and if you didn't know, now you know.
It's dark and hell is hot. Ain't no sunshine when it's on. Only darkness every day. Ain't no sunshine when it's on. Cause when it's on, you niggas know to be gone every time. Cause we don't play. Who turn out the lights is what niggas be saying. Now you don't wanna fight, but y'all niggas be playing. Thinking it's alright, keep playing with that bow. And you gon' know tonight when you land in that hole. Dirt getting tossed in your...
Anybody know why Richie the Bobby Lupo?
Hey, fuckface, you wanna get by me? There's only 2 things stopping you. Fear and common sense. And I'm gonna cut your fucking head off. Motherfucker, you knocked my teeth out!